you know, because we become de facto trained spokespeople and we learn this kind of language of human rights and human rights advocacy and UN resolutions and Geneva Convention and so on and so forth, you become trained in this language of NGOs, then you start kind of exporting it to your family members. And it's comical and it's heartbreaking that someone like me at 11 years old would tell my 80-year-old grandmother, no, actually don't call the Jewish settlers in your house Jewish because that will offend Americans or that will offend Europeans. Call them Zionists or just call them settlers. Don't mention their religion that they so proudly wear on their sleeve, that they claim to do everything in the name of. It's a cognitive dissonance, and it's a humiliating also. It's a very humiliating ritual to demand this of your family members. Thank God, this is no longer the case for me, but unfortunately, like this demand for Palestinians to be perfect victims, to be so sanitized and polished and to water down their language is very much still alive and well. And actually, you think that with Israel's aggression breaking every threshold, crossing every threshold, you think that the ceiling for the Palestinian and the ceiling for Palestinian speech would be raised, but it's quite the opposite. The more they kill of us, the more we are expected to be polite in our suffering. And this is a paradigm, I think, that we must reject entirely. They don't seem to have an issue with Zionism, and they don't view Zionism as this existential, racist, expansionist, ideologically driven movement of Jewish supremacy. And that's the issue. It's the situating the occupation as the cause of all of this. Meanwhile, the occupation is a symptom of Zionism, and Zionism should be tackled at the root. But I think ultimately also beyond just like like organizational interests and funding and so on, there's also just an issue of racism. I think many of the people who are our allies and who are well-meaning are just racist inadvertently, like have these a racial lens with which they view the world, where the Palestinian and people from the region will always be less than, will always be savages, and must always prove they're guilty and must always prove their innocence. There's a kind of maybe naive, maybe insidious framing that all of this atrocity is a one-man show, which is like this is all the doing of Benjamin Netanyahu, and that if Benjamin Netanyahu were to cease to exist today, all of this injustice would end. And I think that's by design. It's not naive. I think it's by design meant to absolve the Israeli regime and Zionism as the mother ideology of all of this, to absolve it of all of the responsibility of the responsibility for this genocide. And I think in the same vein and in relation to this, you also see this. You also see this kind of, again, maybe naive, but in my opinion, insidious pretense that these journalists who become state secretaries, who become stenographers for the Israeli government and for the US government, whose articles are basically paraphrased IDF press releases, there's this pretense that they're just doing their jobs, that they are not complicit in the killing, that they have no blood on their hands. It's the same thing we see with the university administrators.